Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to get started now, if that's okay, please. Thank you. I'm David Williams-Mitchell, for those of you who don't know me. I'm the Director of Communications and Membership at EAZA, the EAZA office. And as you can imagine, communications is one of the wider portfolios of the association in terms of our strategy 2017 to 2020. It covers an awful lot of ground, including science communications, including internal communications, external communications, and indeed the conservation campaigns that we run every 2 years as EAZA. This year obviously being the Silent Forest campaign, the second year of the Silent Forest campaign. As part of the communications portfolio, we know that science communications is quite a challenge. Getting across difficult scientific concepts to journalists whose day job may not be dealing with science in the first place can be quite a challenge. So we have invited from the Science Media Centre in the UK, Dr. Fiona Lethbridge, who is the Senior Press Officer at the Science Media Centre. She's going to talk to us to start off with about science communications and how you can get involved. Fiona.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thanks, David, for inviting me to come to this conference, which I've been here all day and it's seemed really interesting, so thanks for having me. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about the aspect of science communication, which is specifically about the media. I'll talk a bit about the work of the SMC in the UK and a little bit about reasons to engage with the media and the benefits of doing so, and then how you can get involved and why I think you should get involved. So the Science Media Centre is an independent press office. We're a small team of 8 and we work in London in the UK. We were set up in 2002 and this was after there had been several big front page high profile media stories in the 90s that went a bit wrong. So that was things like MMR and autism, GM crops, frankenfoods when they were first being talked about, BSE and CJD, and animal research stories as well. So these were the kinds of headlines that we saw during that time. One of the kind of common factors in all those big high-profile stories that we didn't hear enough from the scientists and the experts who knew what the evidence was. So we heard plenty from campaigners, politicians, and people with an agenda, but we didn't hear enough from academics, researchers, experts who knew what the evidence was, knew whether we should be worried or not, and could put things into context for people. So around the early 2000s, there was a UK parliamentary inquiry into science in society, and several people mentioned these stories and said what would be great would be an organisation to work with the UK scientific community and the national media to put these two groups of people in touch with each other more often and more effectively, to try and avoid unwarranted health scares, to try and avoid inaccurate media coverage. And so that's why we were set up. And why is it the media that we speak to? Well, recent evidence still suggests, despite things like social media and despite blogs, that most people still get their science information from what we would call the traditional news media. So that's TV, radio, and newspapers. Now, of course, the method of the way they get there might be different now. So they might be on Twitter and they click on a tweet which has a link in it and they click on that link, and that might be a link to the Daily Mail website or the BBC News website, for example. So despite everything being online now and social media, which obviously offers lots of other opportunities too, it's still the mainstream media where most people get their information from. So we always say, ignore the mass media at your peril. That's where most of the public are listening or watching or reading. If you want the public to get accurate information, the mass media is who you need to speak to. And we also say, if you don't speak to the media, then someone else will. So journalists don't wait for a story until they can speak to the one top scientist in the UK. They will run the story when they need to run the story, whether they've heard from that person or not. So they won't wait to hear from a better expert. They will run the story. So better that the story is written, including the expert comments from experts, than without it. The alternative is leaving a void, which just doesn't get filled by expertise, or leaving a void which gets filled by someone who's not an expert, and then the public could get inaccurate information. We say at the SMC that we'll help the media to do science better when scientists do the media better, so it's very much a two-way thing. We can't expect journalists to get everything right automatically. They don't have scientific training, most of them, so they need the help of experts to help them get it right. So there's no point really in waiting for an inaccurate article and then complaining about it afterwards. Better to be proactive, to speak to the journalist in advance, to get in there early and try and help it be accurate from the off. Because of the stories that we were brought about, that we were sort of conceived as a result of, we really concentrate on the kind of controversial, messy, difficult stories. There's lots of other institutions that do science communication for kind of good, happy, fluffy, nice news stories. We don't do those, sadly. We are here specifically for when things get difficult and when things get messy. And that is where we're available to speak to you on the phone or by email. I'm not expecting you to read this slide. This is just to remind me to tell you how we are funded. So we are a registered charity. We receive donations from about over 100 different organizations. Loosely, it's the scientific community, so lots of universities, publishers, research councils, industry, government. There's also one media funder on there, who's the Daily Mail group. And we cap donations at 5% of our annual income to maintain independence from everyone. So it's an annual donation. They don't get anything in return for their money. So they're not paying for a service. They are donating to our charity because they see the point of trying to increase the accuracy of media coverage of science. There are a few things that we do on a day-to-day basis to try and help put journalists in touch with scientists to achieve more accurate coverage, and I'll go through an example of each of those now. So firstly, what we call rapid reactions, then what we call roundups, and finally, media briefings or press briefings. A rapid reaction is what we do at the Science Media Centre when there is a big breaking story that has a science or health or environment element. And one recent example of that, just to illustrate what we do, is in the UK, I'm sure you'll all have heard, two Russians were poisoned with a nerve agent in Salisbury in England. As soon as this happened, we started seeing headlines like this, because all that had been announced was that 2 people were ill having been exposed to an unknown substance. So as soon as those headlines crop up, we start to see them, journalists start to ring us, asking if we can find some experts for them to speak to ask them what it might be, to try and help with their reporting. So we go to, I should say, I'm not expecting you to read these. These are mostly just pictures to illustrate what we do. We went to toxicologists, people who'd responded to similar instances in the past, and asked them, we know it's very early days, you probably don't know what this is, but you can give some general information which would be helpful to journalists. The red highlighting is mine, just to remind me which aspects to highlight to you. So we had comments like this from someone from a radiation expert who was saying this probably isn't radiation poisoning because of how quickly the symptoms happened. Again, someone saying it sounds like this is probably a chemical incident. And another professor giving information about what will be happening with these 2 individuals. So how will they be being treated in hospital? How will the experts who are working with them work out what the substance was that was responsible? So they're very general comments. So you don't have to, in sensitive or quick cases like this, there's no need to know all the information to comment on the individual aspects of things. There are general comments and general aspects which can be useful to journalists, and scientists and experts are definitely the best people to give those, and journalists do want them. So this is just to show where these comments were used in the UK media. So this is in the Times newspaper. So the headline there, speedy effects suggest poisoning of Russian spy wasn't polonium, and one of the comments that we sent out to journalists. So these comments we send out by email to the journalists, all the journalists in the UK. So we've got a list of the science, environment and health correspondents. The UK is very lucky that we have specialist correspondents in those areas at all the national outlets. So we send these comments out immediately. As soon as they come to us, we send them to journalists for them to use. And this is just an illustration of them being used, again, in the BBC article. So the headline, how do you find out whether poisoning has occurred? And lots of comments there that we sent out from experts. Similarly, in Press Association, the Newswire, an article about what happened and lots of scientific information there from scientists. A few days later, once it had been decided that this was a nerve agent and that's what was responsible, Public Health England, who's a health body in the UK, sent out some general health advice, basically saying if you were in these 2 locations, wash your clothing and that kind of thing. And as soon as they said that, we had journalists on the phone saying, why have they recommended this? What does it mean? What do experts think about this? So again, we went to our list of scientific experts. So we've got an in-house database, and the scientists are all tagged with their expertise so we can find them. And we asked them to comment on this health advice. Is it sensible? Why are they telling us to do this? What will that help with in terms of nerve agent poisoning? So here's, again, another expert saying that the risk is very small, and this is kind of a belt and braces approach. This is a precautionary measure, and the risk is very low. And again, these comments were picked up. This actually happened over a weekend in the Daily Mail and in the I newspaper. And also on radio and television. So we had lots of requests for experts to appear on the news. This was top story in the UK for kind of days and weeks. And so there was a big appetite to include the views of experts, which I think is great because there is an appetite for expertise among the media. And our job is to help fulfill that by putting experts like this up to do interviews. So that's just one example, and other big stories that we've done are the ones mentioned here. So events like Fukushima, disease outbreaks like Ebola and Zika, and things like volcanic ash. So things that we would have and could have and possibly did do similar rapid reactions to include these kinds of stories. These are the kinds of stories that it would have been great to get lots of comments out there from experts. The media were writing about this. They all liked these stories. Cecil the lion, Maris the giraffe. They were writing about them. They had questions about them. I think fair enough that they had questions about them. The public wanted to know why this had happened. And so the best people to answer those questions were the experts. And so those are the kinds of stories that we've worked on in the past, and it'd be great to have more of you engaging in that kind of thing. So secondly, a roundup is what we do just before a new piece of science is going to be published. So we get press releases from the main science and health journals. We get them at the same time as journalists do, which is usually 1 or 2 days ahead of publication. So a couple of days before the story is public in the newspapers, journalists have privileged access, and we are lucky enough to have that access as well. The idea being that journalists have time to make their phone calls, do a bit of research, write their articles, and everyone publishes at the same time, which is why you see the same story in all the newspapers on the same day. And then we look for any new stories which we think, well, that's a controversial topic. All the journalists are going to write about statins and side effects, or about a new GM crop, or something like that. So our job is to go to our database of experts and ask them to give us a comment on the science. So these are experts who are in the field in question, but they weren't authors of the paper. And what we want them to do is not to summarize the research like the abstract in the press release does, but to critique it, so to give some information about, is this a robust piece of science? What are the strengths and limitations of the study? Do you trust it as far as you can throw it, basically? Do you agree with the authors? One example of this was a study in a BMJ journal about chemicals in food packaging and human health. So this is what the press release looked like. This is what went out to journalists a couple of days in advance. And the headline is, food packaging chemicals may be harmful to human health. So we saw that and thought, that's quite scary. I wonder if that's true. The journalists will write about this. We should get some comments from scientists who can help them gauge whether it's good science or not, and whether it's a worrying thing or not. So we did. We asked toxicologists to comment on the study, and they gave us comments back, which these are just a few examples, which highlighted the limitations of the work, which there were several in this instance, and put it into context. So saying what the legislation is already in terms of chemicals in packaging, and this person saying there's little to suggest that combined exposures pose a threat to health, other than in a few specific circumstances. Other people saying the chemicals that are detected are of such low levels that they pose no significant risk. And another expert saying this is the difficulty of identifying a hazard and then suggesting that it's a risk. So just because something is hazard, it doesn't mean that the risk is significant. This one was interesting because the story broke early, which meant that The Guardian accidentally ran the story early. the headline was "Chemicals leaching into food from packaging raise safety concerns." And this story was based on the press release, including comments from authors. And then we sent out our comments, which highlighted that actually there was more to it. This was not as simple as the headline made out. And The Guardian then completely changed their article, new headline, "Scientists reject concern over food package poisons," and including lots of the comments there from the scientists. The same on BBC News, so that's interesting because the headline there is about the scientists disagreeing with the research rather than about the research itself. And again, you can see where the comments that we sent out were used. And again, in Press Association Newswire, warning over packaging chemicals, but half the article there is comments from scientists, putting this into perspective, talking about the strengths and limitations of the work. And even in the Express, toxic chemicals found in food packaging, but comments in there from the scientists saying why they didn't think this was something that people should be worried about. So you couldn't have read the coverage of that story and not known that there was disagreement within scientists and that not all scientists were worried about this study. So that's to try and illustrate that you really can make a difference to the way the media report a story by engaging with the journalists, by speaking to them, by sending them comments. You are the people to do this because you're the experts. Better that they hear from you than that they don't hear from any experts or that they hear from campaigners who have a particular agenda. So finally, media briefings. So those are press briefings, physical press conferences, thank you, that we have in our offices, which seem very old-fashioned things now, but we do have them. We have around 1 or 2 a week on average. And this is where scientists come in and sit on a panel, and journalists come in and ask their questions, and it's all on the record. So the point of doing a press briefing is for 2 reasons, really. It gives scientists the opportunity to present things on their own terms. So to sit with journalists and say, here's what we're saying, here's what our research finds, or here's what the evidence says on this topic, and to very clearly say, we are not saying that X causes Y, for example. So to help journalists get to grips with this in kind of real time, and to try and avoid any misconceptions from the off. And journalists obviously get to come along, interrogate scientists, and get their story, or find out more about a topic, which they do as well. So we do 2 main types of press briefing at the SMC, what we call news briefings and what we call background briefings. And I'll just go through a quick example of each of those. So one which we ran a few years ago now was a news briefing on deer culling in the UK. This was a new piece of research that was being published by authors at the University of East Anglia in the UK, who were looking at deer population levels and whether the current cull was working or not. And not was the case. So they were worried about how this would land in the media, because obviously culling is a controversial topic, and they you know, it's important work, and they thought this is publicly funded research, the public have a right to know about this, we want to talk to them about it, but we're worried about what the media will do with it. So we said, well, come in and speak to the journalists. That gives you the opportunity to frame things, you know, in your way, to be really clear and be really open and transparent about what you're saying. So the journalists came along to that briefing, and these were the kinds of headlines and articles. So that one is interesting. I adore deer, but Bambi must be shot and turned into burgers. Quite a frank headline there. But the articles underneath were full of comments from scientists and scientific reasons for why we needed to cull and why we needed to cull more deer. So again, in the Telegraph and the FT, they both covered the story in a measured way, measured headlines, measured articles full of scientific information, and again in the Express. So 1 million deer to be shot, scientists say, and then reasons why that is. And the Sun in the Mirror too, talking about why the cull is essential, putting forward the scientific argument, explaining to the public really why this is a thing that needs to be done. An example of a background briefing now. So this is not a news story, so it's not a new paper. So the journalists don't come along expecting to get a story for the next day's news. They come along because it's an interesting topic. It might be a hot topic that they've been covering on and off. So one of those was the potential of GM animals for food. So the kind of backdrop of this was the general talk about food security and the growing population, and the GM salmon development had been recent at that time. So we got some scientists in who work on GM animals and food security to talk to journalists about where we're going with this and what stage we're at and what opportunities these can offer. Now, as I said, the briefings are all on record, so even though this wasn't a new piece of science, the journalists came along, heard some really interesting stuff, so they decided to write it up. And if you think about how different these headlines might have been 10 or 15 years ago when GM was a newer thing, a scarier thing, this time there were very kind of straight headlines and straight articles about the potential of GM to produce food that would help with growing population and that kind of thing. So that's covered from The Independent. From The Telegraph, pig created in lab could bring home GM bacon, and lots of really good quality, actually, accurate articles about the science of GM, what it offers and what it could mean for the future. And again, more coverage on The Times and in the Daily Mail. And even that little box there that says Frankenstein Farmyard, you think, oh God. But in the box itself, it just lists different possibilities of how GM could be used to either improve animal welfare or improve some aspect of nutrition for people. So you might think, oh, that's negative, but actually it wasn't. And finally, another background briefing, which was on, we called it Is Big Bad. This was about kind of intensive farming versus non-intensive farming, because obviously, things like organic versus conventional farming have been in and out of the news a lot over the years. So this was a really interesting topic, and we thought we'd get the journalists in to meet some of the scientists who work in this area, so about intensive agriculture and animal welfare. And the journalists heard from the scientists, and they, again, although this wasn't a new study, they found that this was really interesting, so some of them wrote it up. And these were the kinds of headlines that happened. So in the Times, free range, not all they're cracked up to be. In the Mail, caged chickens are less stressed than free range. In the Telegraph, how can you tell if a chicken is happy? So again, really nice, straight coverage that the scientists were happy with and that the journalists found really interesting. And other briefings that we're really keen to do and would be interesting with working with you on are things like culling, both wild animals and zoo populations. Animal research, so we do a lot on animal research in science, but also, so animal research for human health benefit, but also animal research for conservation is really important. Other methods of breeding and population control in captivity. So we'd be interested to hear from you about that. Just finally, for 2 minutes, I just wanted to illustrate again the advantage of bringing a journalist in to visit your facility, answering their questions. So 10 years ago, animal research was a scary topic in the UK. If there was a story about animal research, it tended to be from kind of activist campaign groups rather than from the scientific community. So recently in the UK, there's a thing now called the Concordat on animal research, and it's a kind of agreement that universities and other institutions sign up to, and that means that they pledge to be open about it. So they pledge to put the numbers of animals they use on their website. They pledge to help journalists with inquiries when journalists come to them. And this is just an example of how this can work well. So this is a journalist at The Observer, a Sunday paper in the UK, who wanted to visit an animal research facility. So King's College London had him into their primates lab, and he did this really nice piece on animal testing from inside their Parkinson's research lab with marmosets. And the scientists were really pleased with that. Similarly, a journalist at the Times wanted to do the same thing, so he visited a breeding facility in the UK and did this piece about beagles, and the headline is interesting. So defences come down as animal testers dare to say they're proud. So this was, he interviewed lots of people, technicians, people in charge of animal husbandry and researchers, and found that they all cared so much about the animal welfare, and they were also proud of their work because of the standards that they had. And again, a BBC News journalist who wanted to do a piece on animal research, he was invited into the University of Oxford. This is actually a picture from the BBC News at 10, so the main television news programme in the UK. And this is Fergus going in to meet the primates. And again, the scientists were delighted with how this came out. So just to emphasise that the climate now in terms of talking about animal research is much different from how it was 15 years ago. There's never really been a better time to be open about it, particularly in the UK, given the Concordat on openness, which is a sort of, in a way you could say it's safety in numbers. Everyone is open, everyone is transparent, so nobody has to hide anything, and nobody should hide anything. And now I think reputational risk, if there is any, actually comes from not being transparent, but from trying to hide data. So that's it really. Every year we do about 300 of those roundups, so the written comments that we send out to journalists, and 60 to 70 press briefings, but we can't do any of it without the scientists who are on our database. So we would love to hear from more of you, hear about your experiences if you've had any, and we're always at the end of the phone if you have any questions or concerns. So thanks very much for your time.
Thanks very much to Dr. Fiona Lethbridge for that. I think she probably has a more difficult job than I have, which is saying something. So, I would like to move on next into not just about what we say, but how we say it. And so if we could bring up the next presentation. Thank you. So I'd like to talk to you today about framing communications, literally about improving the outcomes of your communications by establishing a better context around the communications that you use and using better words, really. So I think it's worth at this point just giving us a definition of communications as we would use it. It isn't just what the press office or the marketing department or your education colleagues or the CEO does. Communication is every exchange of information between one person and another person. And we do this an awful lot. We have millions of visitors, and so we need to talk to them. You all have staff, bosses, who you need to talk to as well. And getting good outcomes from good framing of your conversations is something that you should definitely explore. Every time you interact with a colleague, a visitor, a journalist, whoever it is, you're trying to get that information across to people. You're trying to make a difference to nature or to a species, to your relationship with that other person, or to the behavior or the reaction of the other person. That should be easy in our case, right? We have lovely animals and everything. They're nice and photogenic and people love them. But you have to ask yourself, does the other party care as much about the subject as you do? I mean, people care about beautiful, fluffy animals, but not enough to stop acting in a way that destroys their habitat, that kills them. Do they not care because they don't know about it, or because they have a conflict? Do they have a priority which is more important to them than saving the whales or saving the marmosets or whatever it may be? Or is it because their context is different? I'll explain. But first of all, I'd like to show you what the basis of this is. Credit where credit is due. This comes from a group called Common Cause for Nature, which is a subsection of a group called the Public Interest Research Centre in the UK. They show that communications work done by environmental and other NGOs is being held up by norms in communications, by the frames of communications that are used, for example, in the media. And PIRC, they work to show NGOs how to change these norms through a toolkit, which I'll show you how to access later. So, the current context of communications. The perception of the world, for most people, is shaped by the news media, as Fiona was saying, and the society we live in. And a lot of that is to do with the economy or human conflict. So basically, most of the stories that you will have are based on one or either of those elements. Obviously, our society is driven by particular prerogatives. The prerogative to feed yourself and your family by earning money in conditions of safety. But what is often forgotten is that this relies on a healthy planet. We know this, but do our people know this? Perhaps not. There's a model which says that you start caring mostly about your immediate family. Once you care about your immediate family, you can then spread your care to your community. From your community, you then start caring about your region, perhaps, your country, your continent, and then the world at large. So in other words, concentric rings really of concern. And I think it's worth pointing out that there is a hierarchy here, from the very small and the very immediate. So how does it affect me? How does it affect my family? This is short-term and personal. And that is on a spectrum. Communications is on a spectrum from there up to huge remote problems like what does my buying a telephone have to do with global warming, for example, with the climate change? So these are huge and remote issues which people may not understand because they have more immediate needs. And in fact, one of the things that we need to do is to look at how we can change that hierarchy or use the hierarchy to our own advantage. Now, how communications exists at the moment is what we call frames. Fiona touched on these as well. They're communications shorthand, and that establishes or reinforces a belief. I'm going to have a small thought experiment here and just ask you to think of the associations that come into your mind when you say the word school. What was school for you? Was school something great? Was it something fun? Was it where all your friends used to hang out, and did you have a lot of fun with that? Or was it that horrible teacher who used to give you too much homework? Was it bullies on the playground? In other words, even the word school comes with so much baggage attached to it, so much context attached to it, that it's really difficult to extract what you actually mean just by saying the word school. How we see it in communications, you would see terms such as tree-hugging environmentalist, for example, or faceless bureaucracy. These are very strong frames. They establish in your mind immediately what they're trying to say. Who is this tree-hugging environmentalist? This is not somebody who just cares about the environment. It's somebody who's completely impractical, that has no sense of what the real world is all about. I'm sure many of you have been accused of such a thing in the past. The frames carry a huge amount of semantic and cultural weight, and they play on the listener's experience, on their prejudice, or on their cultural reference to get their point across. Let me give you some examples. We know that libertarian and right-wing politicians are very good about framing. When they talk about big government, for example, or the nanny state, big government is a very good frame because it says that government is okay, but too much of it is bad. They talk about a tax burden. It's not about what your taxes do for society, it's about how much that weighs you down. It's about what they will present it as being holding back the wealth creators, as stifling entrepreneurship, stopping people from doing what they should be doing in order to be happy, healthy, and free. On the other hand, we could look at all of these different frames and frame them differently. Regulations keep people safe at work. They might hold back businesses in some cases, but actually they stop people from losing their lives. Welfare, paid for by tax, it improves health and equality, which means that people are more likely to succeed in life and to be able to spread the benefits of their success around. Government intervenes where no one else is able, so big government perhaps is a good thing. Tax makes sure that everybody is caught by that social safety net. Wealth creators don't create wealth across the whole of society, perhaps. Perhaps they concentrate wealth instead. And entrepreneurs benefit from taxes. If your workforce is not well educated through a good state education system, then you are not going to be able to work properly. Similarly, if you produce a product and cannot deliver it because the roads are so bad, then you're not going to be successful. So in other words, there are two different ways. That way of looking at things, this way of looking at things. I'm not saying that one is necessarily more valid than the other, but just to give you the impression that there are two different ways of doing it. If I say don't think of an elephant, what are you going to think of? An elephant, of course. So here's the thing. If you use a frame that other people use, then you're going to reinforce it, even if you don't agree with it. Some of you will be of an age where you remember Nixon standing up on stage in America and saying, "I am not a crook," and then stepping back. What did you think of at that moment? You thought, Nixon, crook. You didn't hear all that middle part, you just thought automatically that Nixon was a crook. It brings in this frame, it brings in all of that cultural semantics that are attached into the conversation. If we're talking about conservation, and we're talking about tree-hugging environmentalists, it automatically means that the conservation program is not practical. It's going to do bad as well as good. You can think of positive frames. Even positive frames can be co-opted by people who want to make a point. You can talk about something that's very positive, but have somebody turn it around completely. And what's been shown is that when a frame is used commonly enough, it becomes what people call common sense. It becomes accepted thinking. And that's something that we in the conservation community definitely need to get past. So you need to use your own frames instead, is what I'm saying. So how do you go about doing that? Well, you want to think about what you want to achieve. What is it that you want people to walk out of that conversation or that media experience with in their head? Do you want them to come out thinking that conservation is actually the rational, practical choice? That keeping animals in zoos is actually the rational choice for the survival of species? Of course you do. You need to look as well at what frames and contexts already exist. When people talk about captivity of animals, that frame has been established by the people who don't like us very much particularly, or the people who saw a zoo perhaps back in the 70s and in the 80s and don't understand that zoos have changed hugely in the last decades. You have to think about what kind of cultural points that you can harness. So what is it that makes people think of good things about animals that you can use to talk about your conservation project? So when I was saying that you can co-opt a positive frame, we can look at, for example, animals in their wild habitat and show how we are working to preserve them over the long term, to conserve them over the long term. But that frame can be co-opted as an opposition to zoos. What I think you need to do is to be able to get past that and say that, as with the one plan approach, and I think the one plan approach is an excellent frame, because what it does is it talks about a single population of animals across all populations, across all locations, which means that as a zoo, you're not doing anything that is in contradiction of animals being in the wild. You also need to look at whether you can access people's emotions or not. We saw at first hand with the Marius case that I was spending 15 minutes with every journalist to talk to them, to explain to them the science behind the culling of animals for population management purposes. The people who did not believe in zoos and wanted to make that point were able to say just simply that killing animals is wrong. It's a simple emotional point to make, and it went around the world extremely fast. The other question that you must ask is, can you change the presentation? PIRC, the Public Interest Research Centre, who made this research, showed that you can subvert existing frames. The favourite one that I have of theirs, it's a dog rescue centre. And dog rescue centres generally have dogs sitting in cages going, adopt me, I'm so sad. This particular campaign, though, that they use as an example, changed that around. And it had a picture of a man sitting in an office cubicle. And it said, this man is trapped in a terrible office cubicle, in a terrible grey box for 9 hours a day. Help him to get out. And so basically the adoption of the dog became a way to liberate the man from his frame. So I think that's the thing. Use humor, use emotion, use all these things to make things more interesting, to get people's imagination captured, and then to be able to use it better. You should look at the aims. So I was looking here, what do you want to achieve? Those aims need to be achievable. You can't say, and I think this is something that we learned very clearly over the course of some recent campaigns, that you cannot tell people that small actions that they can undertake necessarily will solve global issues. It's the difference in scale is too big. They can't understand that there is a connection. Excuse me. You need to involve your audience or generate enthusiasm. You can't just say, we'll take care of it, we're the experts. What you need to say is, if you want to save whichever species or nature, then you need to get involved. We will help you to get involved. You need to understand that hierarchy of communications. How can you bring people from very small, very immediate, along the spectrum to more global concerns? And finally, you need to access people's values. Values are a very important part of this. You have a number of different things that you can believe at one time. Some of them are intrinsic, some of them are extrinsic. I'll explain that in more detail. You have extrinsic things which are about personal gain, personal advancement, power, all these things. For example, personal extrinsic, I want a Ferrari, or I want to be Prime Minister, or I want to be President, or whatever it may be. On the other hand, on the other side of the spectrum of values, you have what we call global and intrinsic values. So I want to be part of saving the world. I want to work with other people to do good. Obviously, for environmental messaging, we want to access those intrinsic values. We're not going to be able to get people to buy into an environmental message by telling them about how much money it's going to make them. And I think this is an interesting point as well. We talk about, for example, ecosystem services, and that is often co-opted by business because they want to find a way to make money out of the environment. It's something we need to be very careful of. I would suggest that you visit the PIRC's website because they will show you all over where the values are and what kind of values that you're looking at. But how are we going to, for example, activate those intrinsic values which are important for environmental messaging? Well, let's look at a global and long-term message. Nature and species are beautiful, and connection with them is positive for humanity. I mean, that seems fairly obvious, really, but how much do people actually realize that there is a value, a real value, of being in nature, of seeing animals, of seeing plants? You can ask people to act together in solidarity, to bring a community closer together and to protect nature. So this is a kind of slightly shorter term thing. What you're saying is that if we come together right now, there is something that we can do for our community. And that will help. If everybody does that, then we can make a difference across the world. From a personal short-term point of view, we know that curiosity through learning and exploration will bring wonder to our lives. If you present something amazing to somebody, they will be amazed, they will be thrilled, and they will want to learn more. That's very short-term, it's very personal, but it helps you to access those intrinsic values and start nudging people along that hierarchy. We have, though, some traps. The extrinsic value trap. We think that we know how to be intrinsic all the time, but there are certain things that we should really avoid doing. It's tempting to talk about money. Don't. Remember that people are citizens, they're not consumers. We have been defined for the last 40 or so years as consumers of goods. That is a purposeful choice of the people who set the frames that we live in at the moment. You need to try and avoid transactional speech. So give us $5 and we will save this animal. That's something that you really want to stay away from. And you need to try and retain some form of equality. You don't want to have an idea that we as the zoo community or as conservationists are somehow superheroes. We're not. We can only work if everybody works together. So I wrote this little sentence just to see whether you could see what was wrong with it. So the world's leading authority on ecosystem services has donated 5 million euros to mangrove projects aimed at helping people make the most of their environment. On the face of it, not such a horrible message. But if you look between the lines, you could translate it as, we, who are better than you, are doing something that you can't to exploit the monetary value of something that the silly local people haven't realized is a gold mine. I'm exaggerating. Of course I'm exaggerating. But the point is, with better framing, by saying that the mangroves have a value all of their own, and that you can help to make a difference so that they don't all get destroyed, you can actually have a much more positive effect. With existing frames, don't repeat that existing frame if it damages your communications. They always say, don't debate, relate. This is a very political phrase that they have now, which is that you don't say, for example, with wind farms, people say, but they're ugly and they're huge and everything. You don't start your conversation by saying, wind farms aren't ugly, they don't make a lot of noise, they don't blight the landscape, because everybody thinks, Nixon, crook. It's the same thing. Use the existing frames if they can assist you. Everybody, whether in this room or in the toughest part of the inner city, can relate to a positive image of nature, even if they've never really seen it. It's within you. You can find that positive image of nature, so use that. And remember, as I said before, animals seem happy roaming the savannah in nature films, so make sure that you are on top of that so that people don't say, yes, but you're keeping them in horrible little cages. You need to change the presentation as well. We were talking about that earlier. There's an interesting piece of research from 2014 by a scientist called Mr. Lieberman, Dr. Lieberman, in fact, who ran a project to see whether people reacted differently when a game that he had designed was called two different names. The first name he gave to the game was the community game, and everybody worked together, and it seemed to go very nicely and harmoniously. Then he changed the name to the Wall Street game, and suddenly everybody became grasping capitalist animals. So you can see that, however, if you're going to put a label on something, make sure it's the right label, and that it looks to those intrinsic values. You can place your audience as well directly in the context that you want to present. So, for example, if you have the budget, if your conservation project is relatively local, why not take the potential donors to go and see that conservation project, to work on it perhaps? Why not let the municipality see the potential in an expansion space in your zoo, for example, so that they can understand what that expansion will do for the community and for the zoo and for the municipality itself. And let people see the animals that their actions could help. This is second nature to all of you. You do this. But remember that you're actually doing some quite interesting framing and changing the presentation by actually putting people in front of animals. You are already making a difference. And accentuate the positive. Don't necessarily talk about everything's going to hell. Give us $5 and we'll be able to solve everything. No, I think the better way to do it is to say, despite some setbacks in the past, we're doing pretty well in getting in conservation of certain species. For example, if you're looking at whales, for example, my son absolutely obsessed by whales, and so I've been doing a lot of research into how whales, how the situation of whales was presented over the years. In the past, at the beginning, it was, we are going to lose all these whales. They're all dying. It's hopeless. Everything's going to die. When people started talking more positively, we can save the whales. We can work together to make this a reality. Everything changed. You could start to see much more positivity. You could see much more agency from people. People believed that they could make a difference. And by the late 60s, early 70s, a whaling ban was all but inevitable. So your frame. Make sure you understand your issue and your audience. Don't just come up with something and just chuck it out there. You need to know who you're talking to. You need to know how to talk to them best. Help people to access those values that will help you to achieve your goal. Like I say, in our case, that's usually intrinsic, almost always. Don't use jargon. People don't understand a lot of the things that we take for granted. Biodiversity. Have you actually asked somebody if they understand what biodiversity is? It's quite scary. Don't assume as well that they understand that some animals are endangered and need saving. Try a different angle. Again, look at the campaign about the poor man stuck in his cubicle. That's an interesting thing. Do what I call a grandmother test. Could you explain the issue to your grandmother in one sentence and get her to understand it? This is a technique that comes actually, I was taught this at music college. They said, could you come up with a melody that your grandmother would be able to sing back to you after hearing it just once? And that's really kind of a good communications rule of thumb. Can you get it across in one sentence and get people to understand it? And repeat it whenever it's appropriate. Hammer that frame home. Make sure that people understand that we're not talking tree-hugging environmentalists here. We're talking activists in the service of nature, for example. It's an interesting thing to do. You can call people conservationists at every way. Practical conservation, perhaps, is something that you might consider using. And use that frame wherever it's possible. And finally, this is where it all comes from, the Public Interest Research Centre. Go and check out their Framing Nature Toolkit. It's fantastic, you can download it. And you can use these tools really in any conversation that you have, whether it's asking for more money from your boss. I dare you to find an intrinsic value that helps you with that. Through to helping your visitors to understand more about conservation. All of these things are in there. There are some practical ideas about how to run exercises, for example, to make sure that your frames are working. All over, a wonderful piece of work, and I would very much recommend it to you. So thank you very much. Thanks. The next part of the plenary is less about direct communication, but actually much more about some great framing that our colleagues in the Silent Forest campaign are working on, and how they are doing so far. So I will hand over to Tomáš and Simon, Thomas Ouhel and Simon Bruslund. And then after that, I will introduce to you Dr. Ian Singleton, who will talk to you more about one of the projects which is involved with the Silent Forest campaign. So, Tomáš, Simon, take it away, boys. I might have to extemporize for a minute. Anybody know any good songs? Okay, here we go.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. I was told that we should be serious this time, not like last year. Should we, Simon?
Well, you know, Thomas, my boss says you have to, sometimes you can be a little bit silly about conservation, but only if you can be equally serious.
Yeah.
So we're trying to prove to everybody how serious we are about conservation.
Yeah, because when I sleep, I think about Silent Forest. When I'm awake, I think about Silent Forest. I even feel like we're both turning to birds a little bit.
Really?
Bird-hugging environmentalists.
I'm not sure what you mean.
So, Simon, or shall I call you Magpie? Why are European zoos in a special position to help and to assess the songbird crisis?
Well, you see, Thomas, or Telmina, zoos really have been working with passerines for some time already. We have 25 years anniversary of the Bali minor EEP, and that's more than 10 generations of captive breeding for species that we're now introducing back to the wild with some very promising new results. We have a lot of people within the community who knows a lot about these birds and who've been involved with it for a while. We have this amazing action group, EAZA, working on this subject for a while. And that's a really important thing because there's so much ex situ work needed at the moment.
You see how difficult it is to be a bird.
So, who's our partners in this whole program?
We got 4 really great partners. One is the in-house partner, TASA, Threatened Asian Songbird Alliance, which is formed under the Passeriformes tag. That's passionate passerine conservationist. Then we got the Songbird Specialist Group, Asian Songbird Trade Specialist Group with IUCN. Then we got Traffic, and last but not least, BirdLife International, which covers the scientific and conservation things within our campaign. But sometimes I got a question if it's that serious, or are we just making it?
Well, I think we have the science to prove it, Thomas. There's more than 100 publications now focusing on this crisis. The Asian songbird crisis really have been in the focus of the media and, of course, of scientific attention. And some of these papers are actually quite scary reading.
What is really actually going on in it?
Well, we know that there's a big market for songbirds in Asia, and these songbirds are being traded in big numbers. You see here, EAZA regulation, transport boxes are being used, paper bag with holes, and money are being exchanged, and animals are being traded in large numbers. And some of them, like these Sumatran laughing thrushes, are traded in numbers that are equal to what we think are in the wild. So we try to understand and follow what goes on, and we actually have some of our working group working on ground, being in the markets, doing research, but also working with partners, NGOs, and organizations on site.
And where are those markets? Is it only in Asia or is somewhere else?
We have Asia as a focus area, and of course Jakarta is the epicentrum, and the greater Sundas, the large islands, are being attacked the most. Most birds have gone from Java, which are being targeted for the trade. So Sumatra's been on next, and now Borneo is on the focus.
I was traded myself in the Jalan Pramuka, the big market in Jakarta.
And if you look at the wider area, you have still songbird trade. You have it going on in Manila. You have it going on in Hanoi, in Thailand. But you also have in Taiwan, you have the golden triangle between Thailand and Vietnam and China. And
is it just Asia?
Well, it is just main Asia where the focus is, but that you see the trade is actually because all the migratory birds are being focused as well, so it hits the whole northern hemisphere as well. And if we look into some of these birds in the market, we see increasing number of African birds. So East African species like glossy starlings or white-ears are showing up in large numbers in the market. So they're being imported into Indonesia to cover the demand. And even if we look at some of the Indonesian species, we had these Javan sparrows. We were interested because they were being bred in exhibition standard mutations, and we were wondering about this. So we had a look at a few of these birds. We look at the rings, and these are Dutch breeder rings. So it's quite strange how the people in Indonesia can afford to import Javan sparrows from Europe, but they do it, and they sell them there for a few cents a piece. But it functions because birds are going the other way in exchange. So birds are going from Indonesia to Europe as a commodity.
It's almost like the black-winged starlings found in a home of EAZA in Holland in the market.
Yeah.
Probably stolen from Cikalanga, end up in the Dutch markets.
Well, that's it. We see this trade going on. There's a big market, especially in the Netherlands. As it's a European-wide exhibitors going there, but it's going on this weekend. And it's about 25,000 birds under one roof, and they're being sold. And quite a few of them, we've noticed, and we've been recording this, are some of the species we're seeing problems with in Asia.
So speaking about holding the bird, is it the acquisition statements for EAZA zoos?
Well, we made an acquisition statement about this because we worry, because it's not so that these few birds which are being sold in the market in the Netherlands or in Germany or in Czech Republic especially, these are not damaging the populations in Asia like the masses being sold in Jakarta, but they're really bad role model. Because when we're sitting in a meeting in Indonesia and these guys know, they say, well, you're taking this species and that species, it really doesn't come over that well when we try to argue not to do this trade. And some species, like this colored laughing thrush, they're probably all stolen from one national park in Vietnam, and there's at least 20 pairs in Europe at the moment. It's a big issue, which I think really doesn't make us look well. And if we as zoos would go out and say, okay, well, let's buy some of these birds, which are really pretty and they're in the trade, well, then we're part of the problem, at least more than we're part of the solution. But we're working on that, and we have this position statement. We have activists going to Brussels and demonstrating, and things are happening.
So it looks like it's illegal, right, in Indonesia to trade those birds?
Yeah, we're actually talking a very large degree of illegal trade. So if from the perspective of the law, trading with species where there's no there's no quota to trade them and no legal permits, it actually is illegal. But still it's being done, and unfortunately it's not being caught and stopped in the way that we hope.
But there is this new list of protected species in Indonesia,
That's right.
which covers most of the species which we have in the Silent Forest campaign, so it should be
Fantastic.
all right.
Yeah,
isn't it?
Indonesia just updated the list. It's been going forth and back.
All of them are there?
Well, almost all. We had almost all there, and then it was announced, and there was a public demonstration of this list, and then there was some protest, especially from the people who want to trade with these birds. So the government made a drawback, and they said, okay, well, we'll put three species out of the list again. Unfortunately, there's 3 of the species which are massively threatened. One is extinct in the wild. But we wrote a letter from EAZA and from IUCN and from all of our partners, and it looks like today at least one of these species has come back on the list, so it's a political compromise.
But we still got a couple weeks before it goes to the Ministry of Human Rights, and hopefully the 2 others may survive on the protected species list. But so what are the keys? What can we do? We as birds, we as humans.
Well, of course, the main thing is to do educative works on site, and of course we need to approach the religious groups. We need to approach the children, who's the decision makers of the future. Unfortunately, changing the minds of a whole community and a tradition and a culture takes a long time.
We would need at least generations. So that would be education, right? Talking to people, explaining the issue. But are there some species which cannot wait for it? Maybe a generation, right?
Well, we had a few meetings in the Songbird Summit in Singapore, and we identified with all the experts a list of more than 23 species, which is directly in a need of captive breeding for them to be likely to survive the songbird crisis. So we need to start up some captive breeding.
So that would be one of the tools where zoos can play their role, right?
Exactly. And of course, we need to have these breeding centers in the region. They need to be in the places where the birds are. We need to involve the people who is able to save them in the long term, because at some point we need to put them back in the wild.
We're European zoos, right? So should we breed those endangered birds here?
Well, I think we should mainly try to breed them in Indonesia or in other Asian countries. And from the number of spaces that we calculated that we need, we currently stand at about 12%.
That's not that much,
No,
but better than nothing.
it's true. But zoos are doing contributions also without having the birds. So here you can see all of the sponsors of one of the main breeding centers at the moment, which is the Pregen Conservation Breeding Center, which is run by the Kasi Foundation. And this breeding center have set up a state-of-the-art breeding facility for passerines. And we are also learning a little bit as we're going, because they're actually taking on some of the challenges which we've not been able to breed in the past.
And it's not just Kasi Foundation. With the next presentation, you will hear about
Absolutely.
next coming up.
So hopefully one day we will have our network of breeding centers working closely together and developing all the resources and needs we have. So this campaign is maybe need to stay a little longer. So, how many zoos have actually gotten involved, Thomas?
Actually, we're at 150. Thank you very much to all of you, because now we're nearly in a half of the campaign, but reaching almost the target. But the target was minimally 175. So we're not leaving this room, we are not losing these costumes until we get another 25 pledges. So
That's going to be very warm. Though.
yeah, it's really warm, believe me. So if you meet within this conference a guy, anyone, in a bird costume, please go to him and help him to reach his purpose to wear this ridiculous costume. It is to get at least 175, but I hope for 200 for this conference.
It should be 200.
We have to highlight few organizations who pledged with the platinum, which is What is the Manor, thank you very much, Chester Zoo, Leipzig, and Zigup. So please clap for those four. Thank you very much.
These are our big sponsors. And so in total, how much money did we get together, Thomas, so far? Because we have to remember, we're only halfway there.
for 2 birds to get 200,000 euros. It's just amazing. Thank you for this. In a half of the time, we already got 200,000 euros. We were awarded, the organizations with us were awarded by external grants. And right now, we are hopefully at the one-third of the total sum. So wish the birds good luck to be able to collect this. There are 53, we call them hero zoos. There are 53 zoos which put together 180,000. That's gonna be so many breeding cages for Nias, Minas,
and educative programs and research and all the things that we're planning to do. But you have to remember this is of 150 sign-ups, just 53 have actually pledged monies at this point. So these are really the ones we need to work with. And of course, we need more zoos who have already signed up to go forward and say, okay, we signed up, but now also we want to give some money, of course. And we do have lists, and we are not afraid to read them out aloud. So,
and if you come to us, you're probably on that list, so. Yes, normally at the presentations, you're not allowed to turn on your phones. We always have different kind of presentations, so anyone is free to open his phone, go to www.facebook.com, go to Silent Forest Campaign and like. So again, we got locked the doors, and right now we got 1,479. Please make us happy with at least 2,000 or 2,500 likes.
I don't see anybody playing with their phones. This is really bad, Thomas.
Because they confiscated them in front of the gates.
So yeah, this is something to do. If you already like our campaign on Facebook, then you use the time to rate it with 5 stars, and then it's also okay.
Do you know that this is all online? So we talking to you in TV.
Everybody at home.
Like Silent Forest Campaign. But it's not about money only. It's not about popularity, about likes on Facebook. How do zoos come up with their creative ideas how to collect money?
Actually, quite a few zoos have done some cool stuff, and in Heidelberg we're selling stickers, and we're happy to sell some to you.
We do a lot of things in Liberec either.
Yeah, but you know, the guys at Avifauna, two colleagues from Avifauna, they actually went on a biking ride, and they challenged friends and family and zoo visitors to donate money for this ride. And you have to imagine that they went up the Vosges Mountains in France.
Dutch people.
Oh yeah.
Mountains.
Yeah.
Nice.
It's very impressive.
Thank you.
Give them a round of applause.
They were, yeah.
Yeah, and Cologne Zoo did a tattoo day, so you could actually get a tattoo of your favorite bird. It's pretty cool as well.
I very recommend Hilnias Mina. It looks good on anywhere.
Who wouldn't want to have this on their chest? You know, I mean, this is pretty cool stuff.
But we shouldn't forget to mention the exhibitions and things what the zoos are doing.
Yeah.
Lovely picture was with Anna. Thank you very much from the Attica Zoo.
We have to get there first, Thomas.
Is
But all
she
of these beautiful exhibitions, of course, Attica Zoo has to be in the center. So everybody's chipping in, everybody's doing cool exhibitions, and we have absolutely modern pictures and we have time to show, but it's very, very cool.
Yeah, so that was a presentation inside the zoos. But what about educative resources?
Well, you know, we have on the website, and for those blessed ones of you who already signed up to the campaign, they will have seen that there's loads of things to download. So at the point where you have the password to the website, then you can access posters, pictures, references, technical details. There's all kind of stuff that you can use for your own exhibitions and your own educative works.
And you probably know how to get the password.
I know the password.
Oh, me too. So, there were movies, there were things, and we were so happy to see that not only people within the campaign group, but the external people were motivated to contribute to the conservation. That was fantastic movie by Eleanor Paish, awarded by many documentary prizes. It's called Taint Love. It's free on YouTube.
You can download it on the website.
Very recommend it. And it's not just one movie. Right now, the Belgic documentarists are finishing movie, which is gonna have a name, Will You Hear Us? And it's gonna be about story of of Ballymena.
Yeah.
So sometimes I feel sad that we cannot capture all of the activity, but on the other hand, that's what the campaign is about, right?
And Lurosa Zoo did this nice play. I think you felt a little bit inspired by that, Thomas, didn't you?
Well, we got better beaks.
Yeah, so what about singing? You know, it's songbirds. There should be more singing.
Yeah, I really want to sing to you all, actually.
Yeah, you want to sing?
Black-winged starling,
You wanna sing?
we wanna hear
So
you
this
sing,
beautiful song
singing
was
for
composed and
songbirds
written
with all
in
the boys
Chester
and
Zoo.
girls.
And it didn't stay in Chester Zoo, and this is really great. We put this clip to Czech schools and asked them to make their own arrangement, make their own lyrics. And we get more than, if I'm not wrong, 20 schools all around Czech Republic. And right now we're starting in Germany. So I would be very happy, and I would very much like to encourage you to do this activity. So next year we would have hopefully hundreds, if not thousands, let's say hundreds of schools making their own song arrangement. I have to say that they really liked it.
Yeah.
So you can find this information about the competition of making this own arrangement.
It will be out in a few days.
Yes,
So, did you do a songbird day, Thomas?
I did.
Liberec?
Did you do the
We
songbird
did one in
day?
Heidelberg, yeah. And quite a few zoos have done one, and of course it's open to everybody when they want to do their songbird day. It has to fit in the agenda and the calendar of every zoo, but it would be nice if a lot more zoos would have a songbird day next year.
The biggest advantage on a songbird day is that you can make it anytime.
Yeah.
Yeah, because songbirds are worth it.
So, and we asked everybody to collect binoculars. How is that going, Thomas?
Wonderful. For example, Copenhagen Zoo collected 30 used binoculars, and we already sent them, and they are already in Indonesia, more than 70 binoculars. They will be distributed with the organization who some of you may know. It's called Green Books. It's an organization based in Bali, and they are doing eco-literacy. They has established already more than 70 eco-libraries, and they are establishing now children birdwatching clubs. So the first batch of binoculars has just arrived a few days ago to Indonesia. It went through hard work, through customs. So we hope that we will have another hundreds of used binoculars, and we can make children enjoy birds not in a cage, not on a pen, but in a tree branch.
It's interesting when somebody sends a box with 30 binoculars that they think it's military equipment, huh?
Yes, and you need to pay special tax for military equipment. So don't send the one with the grayish military color. Just pure black, it's fine.
And what about all the merchandise?
Yeah.
Is there any chance to see some of this stuff?
Is there anyone who haven't seen our stall with the merchandise? Probably not. So please stop there, look at the merchandise. We give you a catalog, and you can order some merchandise. It's nice. And I have to say that we already gathered more than 10,000 euros for the campaign by your zoos contributing to the campaign with selling the merchandise. So thank you very much for this.
Yeah, that's really cool. And also, I think a lot of staff, a lot of members of the zoos, co-workers and colleagues are interested in some of this stuff. It's not only for the zoo shop, but it's also T-shirts and mugs and things that couldn't fail in any office in a zoo.
Once you drink a coffee from a silent forest mug, you don't want to drink a coffee from some other mug.
Because you burn your fingers.
Yeah. So let's go a bit more again to the science.
All right.
So,
well,
how about the passerine, Simon?
yeah, well, we have passerines in our zoos, and actually there's quite a few. And we've now done this year a nice RCP workshop. And if you want to learn more about some of this, then come and join the songbird, the passerine tag presentation. It's on Friday, or on Saturday, sorry.
And it's open in very early
It's
morning.
open, yeah, it's in the morning. And of course there's a lot of insight to how we found out to develop this RCP. But if you look through it, you'll see that there's a lot of information on difficult species. And we have some of the first best hospitality guidelines out. Of course, our target is to produce 10, so we need to be busy on that in the next year. And some of these species, like the Javan green magpies, are now introduced as an EAP in Europe, and they are breeding. And it's excellent work done by the zoos involved, because these are some of the most challenging passerines, and thereby some of the most challenging birds that we do keep in zoos.
So it's all around, it looks quite good. Birds are breeding. We got some money for making breeding centers, education. Indonesian kids can enjoy seeing birds. So how is it? It's not that bad, right?
We need more. And we're only halfway there, so please everybody, join the movement.
and don't let the forest be silent. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you could add this.
Thank you. Going backstage now to cool down and have a cold shower, I think, possibly. Now, on to another rare bird with also exotic plumage, I'm sure. Dr. Ian Singleton, who is from this is Sumatran orangutan? Yes. But also will be one of the projects earmarked by the Silent Forest Campaign for further development. Ian.
Good evening. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come and give this talk. It's a new one for me because I have to talk about birds, but I'm still going to talk a little bit about orangutans. The goal is to try and just explain a little bit about who I am and what we're doing over in Sumatra, and then I'll explain a concept called the Orangutan Haven that we're working on, and then the reasons why we're going to be involved, hopefully, in songbird work will become clear. So let's start. I basically work on a thing called the Sumatran Orangutan Conservation Program for a Swiss NGO called PanEco, and then most of my staff in Indonesia work for a thing called Yayasan Ecosystem Lestari. So we know orangutans. When I started with orangutans quite a few years ago now, there were 2 subspecies, but they were upgraded to species according to the experts. So we have the Sumatrans on the right here, the beautiful ones with the good-looking beards and everything else, and then we have the ugly Borneans over here on the left, so the 2 species, yeah? There are around 13,500 or so Sumatran orangutans left. They're critically endangered. 90% of them live in this Losa ecosystem area, this purple line here, which is a very special bit of forest, and mostly in the province of Aceh, which you probably know from the tsunami. But 13,500, people say, well, why are you worried about them? I say, well, remember that Barcelona's football stadium seats 99,000 people, so all the Sumatran orangutans in the world would sit quite comfortably just behind one goal at one end. So the next time you see Lionel Messi lining up a penalty, imagine that's the entire global population of Sumatran orangutans sitting right there. But the Losa ecosystem as well, by working to protect the habitat of the Sumatran orangutan, we're also working to protect the habitat of Sumatra's most iconic big 4, the rhino, the elephant, and the tiger, and a myriad of other species as well. There are tigers and elephants further south in Sumatra, but in tiny populations of 10 here and 5 there. The only real hope for these animals is up in the north in the Losa ecosystem where the orangutans are. The elephants, I just came from an elephant meeting as well, and we called this special meeting because we're losing them. We're losing them at the rate of almost 1 per week right now. The number of known deaths in 2014 was about 48, in 2015 about 36. Imagine that some of those we don't know about. So we're talking about 1 a week, and the current estimates are around the sort of 1,300 mark. So we're going to see the last elephant die in about 15 to 20 years if we don't do something about it. We are literally watching these animals go extinct. But as I said, there were traditionally 2 types of orangutans, the not-so-good-looking Borneans and the much more handsome and pretty Sumatrans. But now we've got another one. So we declared in November last year a new species of orangutan called the Tapanuli orangutan. Now, this came about because we were working with scientists from around the world looking at the genetics of known captive animals and everything else, and we found that these Tapanuli orangutans down here to the south of Lake Toba clustered out quite distinct from all the other orangutans further north in Sumatra, just as the Bornean orangutans did as well. So this is when we started to really think, oh, we've got something strange here. And then the genetic experts, of which I'm not one, also looked into it, and apparently the population appears to be much older than the other 2. So we're actually now looking at the Tapanuli orangutan being the last remnants of the original ancestral orangutan population from which all those in the north and all those in Borneo are descended. The problem is there's less than 800 of them left. So I need to redo that football slide and just have 1 or 2 seats in the corner representing the Tapanuli orangutan. And it overnight became the most endangered great ape in the world. Now, who are we, the Sumatran Orangutan Conservation Program? We're nowadays working in about 10 different field locations. We have over 100 staff scattered around the place. We've got 2 orangutan reintroduction centers, Jambi and Janto. We've got 3 field research centers where we study wild orangutans and other species and habitats. We've got a quarantine center. We've got a haven project now at the office and the Batang Toru monitoring station. So we're quite a diverse project. When we started many years ago, the goal was to set up a new rehabilitation and reintroduction project for confiscated pets because there wasn't a legal one functioning at the time. So we did that. We've now received over 370 orangutans since we started in 2001. But nobody's going into the forest to capture these infants. These are a byproduct of forest loss. So when a big plantation or whatever goes into an area and destroys all the forest, 99% of the orangutans get killed along with everything else. And a few lucky animals end up as pets and survive that process. And if they're really lucky, they end up with us and they get a second chance at being a wild orangutan again. So every one of these animals comes to our medical center for quarantine. They get full medical checks, TB, hepatitis, all these kind of things. And then they're eventually socialized in these large social cages with other orangutans of a similar age before they move on to the reintroduction process. Now, we're reintroducing orangutans down south in Jambi, which is about a 28-hour drive, and also up in the north in 2 areas that historically did have wild orangutan populations, but not in sort of recent memory. So we're actually reintroducing orangutans within their historical range. And the goal is to release we need at least 250 surviving reproducing animals in both of those field sites. And then we will be happy that we've got genuinely new, viable, self-sustaining wild populations of orangutans. The other one is up there in the north, 108 released so far. So as far as I know, we're actually the only organization anywhere that's releasing and trying to establish brand new, sustainable, viable wild populations of a great ape. I don't know anybody doing that with chimpanzees or gorillas or Bornean orangutans. And the proof of the pudding, we're getting some successes too. We know that orangutans have their first infant when they're about 15 years old. Most of the animals we release are around 7 or 8. But we've now started to get babies being born in Janto and Jambi. We've had several. We've had other successes as well. A lot of the work nowadays is in habitat protection. We worked with a local NGO called Wali and managed to cancel an illegal palm oil plantation. We also worked with the government of Indonesia to prosecute 5 different companies, and one of those resulted in the biggest fine ever against any concession holder in the country, $26 million. It hasn't been paid yet, so our work is not done, but we're still working on that. And we also recently managed to cancel a major geothermal plant that was planned right in the middle of the Losa ecosystem in one of the richest areas. So we have some successes too. Now I come to the haven. Now, a few years ago, I realized that we had 6 orangutans that we can never release. They're not all on here, but 3 of them. Losa here is shot 62 times with an air rifle. He still has pellets in both eyes. He's blind. Deknon has a chronic arthritic condition that will probably never resolve, female. And Chrismon spent 19 years in this cage and has kind of lost a lot of physical condition and mentally traumatized too, so he'll probably never be released, but he's made great progress. So when I was at Jersey, when I was a keeper back in the 90s, we built these beautiful islands. And I thought, well, if these animals that we can't release are going to be with us for another 40 years, I don't want them in metal cages. Why can't we build some islands like we had in Jersey, give them a much better quality of life? Ideally, we get people to come in there, they can learn about why these animals are there, what the plight is, how their daily lives, the decisions they make in their office impacts those animals in the field, and really allow these animals to play a role in the future of their species. So we started looking for land that was suitable. We were looking for a wetland area. We found this beautiful little valley here that was very, very swampy at the time. But it came as a package with 50 hectares. So we've now got 50 hectares of prime agroforest land just within about 30 minutes of the city of Medan, which has about 4 million people, plus or minus a couple of million sometimes. But it's an agroforest area, very much mixed. We've got oil palm, we've got oranges, we've got rubber, all these different crops. But the valley here we're developing as the Orangutan Islands. So there's 9 planned at the moment. We have room to expand in the future, but each orangutan or a pair of orangutans will have an island and an access to a little holding area across a bridge, very much in the same design kind of thing as the Jersey Zoo we did years ago. These are just a few pictures to show you what it looks like. So they're water moats, again about 5 meters across and 1.5 meters at the deepest point. We'll have a little electric fence around there as well eventually, whether we need it or not. And we've got these nice dams with beautiful waterfalls and all that kind of stuff. And everything, so the vision for the orangutan haven has grown from just providing a home for these few orangutans we can't release to a much bigger concept. We've already developed a microhydro plant, a run-of-river dam and electricity generation. We've started to use sustainable materials like this bamboo bridge. We want everything that we build in the haven to be an example, an exhibit in itself of sustainable materials and alternative ways of doing things. And we want people to be able to go there and see for themselves how to do it and to learn how to use these different techniques and materials. And we're also employing a lot of people in the area, and we're using the centre already for schools and university courses, and education will be a major, major focus of the whole project site. Now, one of the issues we want to deal with is the wildlife trade. Now, a priority for me is that on the road near the haven is a major market for these Pteropus vampirus fruit bats. But the people who buy these are actually quite educated, middle class and above. They buy them for asthma medicine. But they've never seen a fruit bat except in a tiny cage at the side of the road. So the idea is we try and net over 10 to 20 big trees and have a couple of dozen fruit bats in there and really explain to people how intelligent they are, how complicated their social life is, the fact that people have radio-tracked, radio-collared fruit bats in Malaysia and they fly over to Sumatra to feed and they fly back again the next morning, to the point where I think we can reduce demand by about 50% in 5 years. That's my goal. But also other species. And this is where we come into the birds. So I've known Tomáš for quite a few years now, coming in and out, checking on things, going off into the forest and doing surveys for the laughing thrush and various different things. And we got talking, well, we really need a proper breeding centre out here. And Ian, you've got the land. Yes. And I also want to do stuff like that. You know, it's really depressing year after year to see this kind of stuff still going on and wanting to do something about it. But now we finally have a chance. Now, I worked at Jersey years ago, and one of the reasons I wanted to work at Jersey because I saw that it actually did can-do projects. But also when I went to Indonesia, I thought, well, everybody's running around trying to save orangutans and rhinos and tigers, you know. But the place is full of mini Jersey Zoo-style can-do projects. You know, reptiles, amphibians, birds, a lot of the smaller mammals as well. I really, really want to get the kind of projects that Jersey has done in the past operating and appearing more often in Indonesia, because the scope for it is massive. So examples, obviously, from the ones that I always remember is the Mauritius kestrel and the pink pigeon and the echo parakeet, down to a few individuals a few decades ago, now hundreds free in the wild. And I want to be able to do this kind of stuff in Indonesia with songbirds and many other species. And yeah, basically the can-do conservation approach, rather than the let's try and do conservation approach. So the idea is that we build on the haven a facility for captive breeding for the particular songbirds. The idea at the moment is to model it on the Chikananga Center, which was built in Java a couple of years ago. I've also want to go see Tony's place in Prigen and see what's going on there, learn from him. And the focal species at the moment are intended to be the Nias minor bird, which is now extinct from Nias and a few of the other islands it was found on, but there are still one, possibly two wild populations on a couple of the smaller islands, but a very, very rare, almost extinct species. The Sumatran laughing thrush, heavily traded, it flies around in flocks, so when they go out and capture these birds, they get quite a few of them at the same time. And I've never seen one in the wild. I've only ever seen them in the bird market, even though I've spent 20 years wandering around Indonesia's forests. I've never seen one. And this, I've never seen one of these either. But I believe they live in swamp forests. I spent most of my time in Indonesia in swamp forests. I've never seen or heard one. I think they were already extinct in Sumatra when I first went out there. There's a few remaining in some isolated fragments in Singapore and neighboring islands, and possibly a few pockets in Borneo as well still, but they're totally gone from Sumatran mainland and other places. And there's this Mysia, which we don't know much about. We know it's heavily traded, but almost nobody seems to know anything about the wild population at all. So we really need to get out there and find out what's going on with those guys and see if we can start building up captive populations as well. So I'm really excited. There's also a lot of the offshore islands seem to have their own taxa of the white-rumped shama. So although it's a very common bird in captivity, it's also one of the species that was recently removed from the protected species list. But there are many other suspected subspecies on the outer islands as well. So the new facility that we plan, like I said, modeling the Chikananga one, which seems to be quite successful. 24 aviaries with a keeper corridor in the middle. Security is an issue. There have been raids, even by police and military in the past in Indonesia for things like the Bali starling. So we need to think about security. The inside generally like this with removable nest boxes. And obviously food prep and veterinary areas as well. But I'm also now thinking as well about what other stuff we can be doing in the future. I recently got a call out there. A friend of mine had found 4 Aceh bulbuls in a shop in Takengon, and apparently nobody has ever seen this species in trade. It's a unique species to the Aceh area. So he bought them. They're now being cared for by a vet up at Unsia, but this is the existing captive breeding facilities in Sumatra. We need to upgrade this pretty quickly. And a friend of mine called me as well a couple of years ago and said, we've just found 2 silvery pigeons in the Nias Museum. Now, I was aware that that hadn't been seen in the wild since the 20s until somebody photographed one flying in Simeulue, and then James Eaton went to, in Siberut, and then James Eaton went to Simeulue and found a couple of birds there. But as far as we know, that's like 3 wild birds are known or something, and 2 in captivity. And looking at that, I'm no expert on pigeons, but I suspect they're both males, yeah, from the flat heads. Maybe somebody can tell me wrong. Ciconia stormii, another species I know well from the swamp forests, something that we really should be looking at doing something for. And the white-winged wood duck, again, something which I know from the swamp forests. I saw 3 of these about 4 months ago flying down the river near my old research camp, and I'd love to get to know more and get to work properly on these. Just to recap, the Nias minor was traditionally found here and in the Babi Islands and the Banyaks. It's gone from most of them. The straw-headed bulbul, we used to be all over Sumatra, Java, I think, Thailand, Myanmar, Borneo, and now is restricted to a few of these little islands here and a few patches of forest in Borneo, almost gone completely. The white-winged wood duck, we know it down in Lampung, but we also have a small population up here that we don't know much more about, except that I've seen 3 of them recently. There were 5 the other year. The Mysia, we don't know. The laughing thrush is from the Barisan mountain range. I don't know how far south it goes. Is it still reported to go all the way south or not? But it's probably restricted up here as well in Aceh by now. And this, we talk about the silent forest, but this one is the most striking for me because the call, some of you will know it. But every time you went in the forest in Sumatra in the past, you would hear this. You rarely see it, occasionally you get lucky, but you would hear it all the time. It basically, I think the Dayaks in Borneo used to refer to the call as like the crazy wife who just murdered or butchered her husband or something. It basically goes, "Huh," and then it waits about 3 minutes. And then it goes, "Huh," and then it waits 2 3/4 minutes. And then it goes, "Huh," "Huh," and then after about 3 minutes it gets shorter and shorter, and then it goes, "Huh, huh, 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 huh." But you would hear that, and it was just like, you never even thought about it. Now, I can't remember the last time I heard that. The trade took off on these animals about 3 or 4 years ago, and now Janto and Suak and all these other places in Bukit Lawang, I haven't heard this species for quite a long time now. So it is being hammered. And these are photographs from the amazing article in National Geographic the other week. So basically, again, thank you for the opportunity to tell you a little bit about the background and why we're getting involved in this amazing silent forest campaign, and how happy I am to be able to finally do that. I got bored of orangutans years ago, so it's great for me to move into other species and have a bit more interest and learn some new things. But essentially, as I tell everybody at my talks, the successes that we have, there are a few people running around in Sumatra killing themselves trying to collect data and analyze and share stuff and campaign. But when you really want to change the way the government thinks, you need your Facebooks and your Twitters and your media and you need your press conferences, and you need to get the story out to the millions of people out there around the world. We just did a petition against a hydro dam that they want to build in the Tapanuli orangutan forest, in the last bit of the last 800 of the ancestral orangutans. They want to build a hydro dam in the richest part of that forest. And there's just been a petition on site, got 1.3 million in about 3 weeks. And that goes to the president, and they know about it, and they start to care about it, and they start to look in, and things can happen. When we did the legal cases against the palm oil companies, it was a lot of that was due to Facebook sharing and Twitter and campaigns and getting the media involved to put pressure on the government to actually act, and eventually the ministry took these companies to court itself as a result of that. So I always remind people that no matter who's doing what out there in Sumatra, the future of all these species depends on you and everybody else. And if there are any Americans in the room, that's just for you. So with that, I'll say thank you for your support. We've now raised a significant amount of the money that we need for the new centre, not all of it. We're still waiting for a couple of proposals. I didn't know whether to mention the zoos, the people involved, so I kept silent, but there's at least one zoo in this room that is now thinking about providing funds to us as well, directly. So we do hope to be able to build the centre if not this year, but in the very first half of 2019 and have it running by the end. I've also got a couple of keepers from the orangutan work now in Jersey, training up in learning how to look after birds and egg rearing techniques and all that kind of stuff in preparation for this new program. And we very much hope to work with my old colleagues, David and Harriet and Glyn and people like that in Jersey to train up and help us develop our husbandry protocols for these species as well. So very much a collaborative effort. So with that, I'll shut up and say thank you for your support. And anybody wants to know more about what we're doing and support anything we do, then please do go online and find us. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you, Ian. That's great. Just before we wrap up, the Silent Forest campaign team, those can-do conservationists, we'd like to bring the whole team up onto the stage so that you can see who they are and you can come and bully them for more information about how to join the campaign. There is one more other thing to say that I've been asked to say as well. If you go to the Education Committee meeting or to the Passerine tag meetings, you can find out more about the campaign and how it's developing. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you. So, So, it's good. I just want everybody to see who to talk to, and please do come and talk to us about songbirds. We're really very interested to talk to all of you about it.
Because we don't talk about anything else.
Yes, pretty true. So make sure you mark those faces and come and talk to us. So you have Matthias, you have Lucia, you have Barbara, you have Roland, Andrew, David, and then the two crazy ones. So yeah, enjoy the songbirds, enjoy the conference.